All right. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Gumtree of Liberty podcast. I'm your host, Stuart, or LibertyDownUnder, as some of you may know me on Instagram and on Twitter. And we've got a great show for you guys today. So I'm joined by my co-hosts, Gerrie and Jack. And we've also got a guest co-host, Paul. And we're here to talk to Senator Alex Antic from South Australia, who's coming to us live from hotel quarantine. Is that correct? You're in hotel
Yeah,
quarantine?
that's correct. That's correct. You've summed it up well.
Now, you're a senator, correct? So why are you in quarantine of all people? You think that there'd be an exemption if you were something.
Oh, look, no, I don't. I don't for a minute expect to be treated any differently. In fact, quite the opposite. I think, that's one of the great things about Australia is that we're all treated the same way. But my concern is, well, there are a number of concerns I've got, I have to say. But the first one, perhaps, is simply this sort of growing bureaucratic overreach that we're seeing in our country at the moment. We've sort of come from this sort of country persona, Paul, which you would have seen years and years ago, the sort of the Paul Hogan throwing another shrimp on the Barbie style country where it was all very easy going. But we've gone through this period now where things seem much more tense and much more controlled. And I think the only thing we can put that down to is this sort of bureaucratic overreach. I think parliaments all across the country have given away far too many powers to the health bureaucracies and others, and there really isn't enough oversight. So the rules don't bend. The rules can be determined arbitrarily, and that's what's happened here. I don't really know the answers why. I certainly don't ask for any special treatment, not at all. But we have a system designed to keep healthy people out of COVID environments like medi hotels, at home if we have to quarantine, safely and securely and away from other people for their own safety and for other people's safety as well, I suppose. I mean, that's the whole system. So that's my concern, is this sort of growing overreach of government powers as much as anything. And we've entered this very strange world where everyone's medical care is everyone else's business, which I really object to. I have a firm belief that people's medical care and treatment is a private matter between them and their families and their doctors. And that doesn't seem to be the world we're living in with our country at the moment. So it's very alarming.
Alex, is it so you applied for freedom of information to South Australian Health, and then a couple of months later it was elevated up to the Ombudsman, and then what was it, a week after that you came back from Canberra to be met by police? Yeah. I mean, I don't know if it's rocket science from any thinking person to connect the dots there. But what's bothering me, a lot bothers me, but in relation to this, how does that fare with us, with our federation? And like this whole, there's an ongoing debate between some constitutional lawyers as far as the government power, Australian federal government power over the states. So how do you see that, if that's actually the case, that the state government is essentially punishing you for attaining information on your right and your responsibility as a senator for your entire state?
Well, look, I should start, Gerrie, by saying, look, I don't really know. I don't know what the reasons are, I'm just sort of making statements of fact, in that capacity. Those are statements of fact. I did do that. I haven't had a response, and here we are. But what I will say is, though, that it does bring up a whole host of really interesting discussions about our country, the way it works, and the fact that it's worked for so long in this federation system. And I've always been a big believer in it. But the last 2 years do start to give you reason to rethink. And I'm, as a sort of a dyed-in-the-wool conservative, I'm not someone that would jump at change very quickly, because I do think the institutions have served us well. But I've seen some really interesting articles written about things that would be close to Paul's heart, like a Bill of Rights in Australia. And for the longest time, I've been very resistant to that, because I'm frightened about the manner in which they're interpreted by the courts and giving judges more power sometimes than they are. But what we've seen over the last little period, there's a lot of stuff that now I think gives us reason to reflect on where we've been and what might be good for our future. Because what this episode has shown in Australian history is that the states have a lot, if not all, of the power when it comes to individual spots. And I know that's true in the United States in many respects as well, but certainly here, The states have control over those plenary powers, the health powers, and they have wide-ranging powers to do exactly what they've done. That's really what's happened here, is that state governments all across the country in very similar ways have amended emergency management legislation to effectively declare an ongoing and never-ending emergency, which is a nonsense, and then to gift powers to the various bureaucrats and public bodies, such that there really is no recourse. I mean, I can't get answers as to what's going on. I get sort of drip-fed communication over 4 days. And when I got to the airport, the only thing I will say about the treatment that I received that was different was I turned up to a host of cameras, media people, and questions about matters that were none of their business, as I was effectively being taken away to a medi-hotel. So, that didn't happen by chance. That happened because somebody somewhere wanted it to happen. They didn't just guess that, they found out.
Just a question, if you were carted away by police in front of cameras, and this is something I'm certainly not seeing it in American corporate media. I'm getting any news flash of protests and anything that are happening on alternative media sources.
Right.
What does this do to your image as a politician? Is this damaging to see you carted away?
Oh, look, Paul, I think it's a great question. I don't know. I think. Hopefully it doesn't, but it's not a good look. And I mean, the photographs that were used were, designed for shock. I mean, it's true there were police there, but I actually went up to them and said, listen, the direction I've been given is that I have to come with you. And they said, oh, what's your name? And la, 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 la. But, when it gets reported in a very different way. They're almost that you were picked up by the collar and dragged away. So there's all of that. I mean, in truth, there are lots of people that have been, this Medi Hotel is full, I'm told, which is okay, but there are differing versions of them. There are versions for people that have COVID. There are some that have a mix, I'm told, and there are some, I think, that have less. But I just don't understand why it is that, people like myself aren't at home. And I certainly don't understand I shouldn't say I don't understand. I've got a pretty good idea, but I certainly don't take lightly what happened in terms of the leak and what it was presumably designed to do, which was, just a little message that we're watching.
And then second question for the rest of the Americans that will be watching, typically under Australian law, do you have a system of recourse if you are taken away against your will? Do you have a way to approach and say, hey, this was unlawful, or is this something under law? Typically, maybe things are different under COVID law, but usually would you have a recourse to say, hey, I'm being detained against my will?
Well, look, it's a great question, and the answer is this: if somebody on the street had been detained and put at a local police station for a petty crime or even a more serious one, they would have the right to ask for bail. But because of the use of the emergency power and this concept that we've got a pandemic and we've got to be careful, there exists really almost no right. So it's a very frustrating situation, and not just frustrating for me. I mean, as I sit here in hotel quarantine, I'm still answering emails of people. I had an email from a lovely lady, sort of an elderly lady, just recently, who told me that not only was something similar happened to her, but as a result of the laws that have been amended now, they send her the bill. So she was for a stay in a Medi Hotel, which presumably could have been done home quarantining. She was sent a $4,000 bill for the exercise. Now, look, there are a lot of things that you could skip over, but that is absolutely unconscionable. She doesn't have the money to pay it. So, I don't know what the bureaucracy do, whether they, theoretically they could go to court and start selling her things. But that's the world we're in at the moment. And I don't know if people in this country have seen that, but it's happening all over the country and people should be alarmed.
But they offer payment plans. Doesn't that make it fair?
I suppose.
Because I was looking to move to Queensland for a little bit before all my plans fell through, and I think it was like $4,000 again. But it's we have a payment plan, so it's fine. But and I also read, because we did a story on the Northern Territory thing.
Yeah.
I read that the stay at Howard Springs cost someone $2,500. And one
That's
thing that
about
I've
the going
never,
rate. Yeah.
So one thing that I haven't heard is whether the people from the Binjari communities and surrounding have been made to pay them, or whether they've been waived. See, that's something that I haven't heard about yet. But I think that would be.
I don't know the answer to that.
Yeah. So it's very, very curious. Going back to the thing about the Bill of Rights, after the last 2 years, would you trust the government to be able to draft a Bill of Rights that would adequately protect Australian people like the US one is supposed to?
Well, I think that's the I don't think that's the question. I mean, I only raise it because of the interesting writings that have been done on it, and the fact that people are even talking about it now sort of starts to tell you how frustrated people are out there. And I mean, it would be a very, very contentious issue. It would be a very difficult exercise, and I think the answer to that is if you had the right people drafting it, then it's something to talk about. But I must say, I'm still not sold on the idea. But what it does show, and we just haven't seen this in this country, because really our federation commenced, our constitution was born, and then we had 2 world wars, and then some good times, some growth times, and really this is the first time that it's been tested in the manner in which it did, where each of the states literally shut their borders. And became their own cells, dictating their own legislative principles. So it's made a very difficult task of the broader picture. And this is one of the issues with some of the concerns I've been having at pushing back at federal level over some of the control, the vaccine discrimination, the vaccine mandates. The power lies with the states. That's not to say there aren't things the Commonwealth government can and should do. That's been my point for a long time. But it is difficult because those powers exist at individual level, and they're very hard to overcome. So it's an interesting dynamic, and things sort of have evolved.
You were talking about the fact.
No, you go.
Sorry,
Stuart.
you get Gerrie.
I'm
just on the fact that you spoke about states all closing their own borders individually. I wanted to get your thoughts on why we haven't seen any action by Scott Morrison and the federal government on, say, using the power they have for quarantine under Section 51 to override what the states are doing and with their borders. I wanted to get your thoughts on why we haven't seen anything come through from the federal government to, really override what states are doing with quarantine and with border controls.
Yeah, well, once again, a lot of those powers do exist with, at state level. I mean, I think you're talking about some of the constitutional powers that exist. Some of them were tested, I think, by One Nation. Pauline Hanson tested some of those, and they're all different. I think Clive Palmer has as well, or is threatening to. Constitutionally, there is the sort of free movement, stuff that hasn't really been tested. But once again, I mean, a lot of those powers are simply for the state. It's really a matter for Western Australia whether or not the Premier there shuts the border, and getting around it and testing it. Look, I don't know. I mean, I think the Prime Minister's used the National Cabinet in good faith. And there are divergence of views about that, but I think the intention was right, because it is a difficult situation. And I think probably, and I'm putting words in his mouth here, but he probably foresaw some of the problems with, handling the states in the way we have. So look, it's just thrown up a whole heap of really tricky, curly issues in amongst all of the operational stuff as well. But I think my sense of it is that the community sentiment that's out there now, comparison to even maybe 3 or 4, 6 months ago, is a quantum shift. I think people are now, generally speaking, people are looking around at the high vaccination rates, and they're saying, you told us to do this, we did it. And in my state here, there's talk of closing the borders for Christmas. You've got families coming home, people that are going to end up in many hotels over Christmas. This is really not what we bought into, and it was always the danger with gifting as this much power to the bureaucrats. They never want to give it back, and that's the problem.
So just going on from Stuart's question, because that was what I was going to ask as well. When people like Augusto Zimmerman, who's quite a well-known constitutional lawyer, and he's been writing on this, that the federal government, the Prime Minister, it does have the power to essentially override all of this. So how come someone like him, and there are others, they seem to be concentrated in WA, Why are they writing a very different set of advice that I'm assuming that the Prime Minister's being given from a legal team? Can you enlighten us on that?
Well, I can't. I mean, I don't know what the thinking about doing that is, except to say that I think, there has been at least for the longest term, this feeling that the states, sort of disrespecting the federation, I suppose, and I think that's probably what we've seen through the Prime Minister's office. Now, I think what we're going to see in future is, and this is once again my speculation, not anything I know, that the increasing sentiment against that, I think, is going to start to change the options, and I think we're going to have to see more pushback, at federal level. That's my view. I mean, that's why it was one of the reasons. It was baked into one of the reasons why myself and Gerard Rennick took the stance we did 2 weeks ago, because, what is going on around the country, I think, does need some more intervention at a higher level, and that was the position we took.
And on that, with only 10 sitting days left between now and, or effectively July, because you've got to take into account after the election is done, then the winter recess and all the rest of it, 10 days. What legislation is going to be there for you guys to even push back on to put that pressure on? So we've essentially Parliament shut down.
Yeah, well, I mean, there's not a lot of time. There's some things that need to get through. There's voter ID laws, which, once again, be dear to Paul's heart, I'm sure. There is the religious discrimination bill, which is another one, the very important one that's coming up, and a host of others as well. It's not a lot of time. You can get a lot done in 10 days, though, I say. We shouldn't rely on that. But look, that's the nature of sitting breaks, I suppose. We've got 2 months now between now and February, early February, when it goes back. And as you say, probably, I mean, I don't know this, but probably an election in between there somewhere as well. So, obviously you need a month run up to there. So it does happen from time to time. It's a short time frame, but, it is what it is. And we'll have to see. I don't know. I don't know what else is of particular import at the moment. There'll be some other bits and pieces. There'll be some procedural type stuff that we'll need to go through. But yeah, we're going to have to wait and see. It's going to be a logjam, that's for sure.
And now that you've gone through something like this, and you're obviously going to be representing people in your state, forgive me if I was trying to figure out the states and territories and what have you.
It is a state, yeah.
Okay, all right. In your state, are you going to be redoubling your efforts, like, to make sure that this doesn't happen to other people? Or I guess I should say, what do you plan on doing going forward to make sure that something that's this egregious to human rights doesn't happen?
Well, I mean, look, that's a good question. And once again, there's not a lot I can do from it at federal level, except continue to talk and speak to those who share this same view, and continue to speak to the executive, the ministry. Because once again, I mean, I think, there'd be some sympathy there for all of this, but these are decisions of our state parliament. My view is very clear that the Emergency Management Act needs to be effectively returned to what it was. The emergency to be, or major emergency, I think, is the declaration. I think that's gone well past its use by date. It wasn't that long ago we were talking about 2 weeks to flatten the curve. We're almost 2 years down from that now, which I'm sad to say was entirely predictable from where I sat. But I think that's now really, really gone beyond a joke. But that is ultimately a matter for state parliament here. And I don't know. I think we've just got to keep talking about it. We've got to keep not being afraid to talk about the things that cause slings and arrows to get thrown. I mean, I've seen now in some online dictionaries, if you say you're anti-vaccine mandate, you become an anti-vaxxer. And that was the language used by one of our chief ministers here in the Northern Territory not that long ago. So that seems to be the line now. And I've said it time and time again when it comes to those mandates. We were told 18 months, 2 years ago that we were all in this together. It never said we're all in this together unless you fail to comply. And that seems to be what's happening now. We seem to be seeing these bureaucrats, health bureaucrats, trying to mop up the last people that are resistant to taking a vaccine for reasons which are theirs and should remain so. And it doesn't seem to make any sense in science, in liberty, and in fact. And I really, really struggle with it, I have to say. And so the answer to your question in long form is, in short form, I'm just giving the long form version, But in short form is that I think we just have to keep talking about it, and we have to keep making sure that people who feel like their liberties and freedoms are important are not marginalised, because I think that there are so many out there who are sharing their own stories. I probably see them more than a lot because I'm a bit of a lightning rod for them, but some of them are heartbreaking. People that can't get to see dying parents, people that are losing jobs they've been in for 30 years, people that can't get home for Christmas, you name it, it's all happening. And it's just a real worry. I really have got strong concerns about where we're headed.
Do you think civil disobedience is the answer?
Well, look, I mean, I have to say, I think we have to obey the rule of law. I mean, I think we do that. It depends on the definition of civil disobedience, I guess. I think that, we need to be talking about these things first. We need to be talking about what we can do and talking to our politicians. I mean, there is a certain bubble-like element in politics. I see it all the time. I remember thinking that as I was heading to Canberra a couple of weeks ago, that as soon as you enter that building, things that seem important inside the building to people inside the building, including the press gallery, are entirely irrelevant to people in the real world. And Gerrie, you'd know that as well, of course. It's that parliaments take their own line on things that are important. The topics of discussion are, silly little things that happen at committee level that no one cares about. And I think what we need to be doing is talking about these big issues. I mean, Paul mentioned it just before. He said, the media are not talking about some of this stuff. In order to see the protests, you have to find it elsewhere. And it's true. I mean, we've had that here. We've had massive protests in South Australia, the kind of protests that we haven't had since Vietnam. And they're getting buried on about page 15 of our local newspaper. And we're being told that there are, hundreds of people. Well, there would have been tens of thousands at the last one I saw. And they weren't people that were being called names, anti-vaxxers, far-right lunatics, white supremacists and all this sort of nonsense. They were people that are losing their jobs. They are people that are, worried about the future. And so I think giving people courage to speak is the real aim here.
But to extend on Jack's what he said before about civil disobedience, and you are right, Alex, there are degrees of civil disobedience. It doesn't necessarily mean violence.
No.
But at what point, when nothing is coming from the talk, at what point do people need and have a moral obligation to reclaim their own sovereignty or power? I mean, I'm coming, I guess, very much from a historical point of view, because I've actually studied how democracies merge over into tyranny. So that's kind of my area. There is not one period in history where a government ever handed back power. There's only ever been times when the people have taken it back. Now, my area in ancient Rome, bloody and brutal. Of course, we're not going to go down that road. But that is a legitimate question about civil disobedience and the way, how do you interpret civil disobedience? In a way, protests are a form of civil disobedience. And from everything that I've seen, they have all been peaceful.
Yeah,
and they grow and grow and grow. But my concern is, at what point does the talk stop and action happens?
Yeah, look, I take your point, and I think you're right about civil disobedience.
And sorry, if you just take yourself, sorry to interrupt, but just if you take yourself out of the Canberra bubble, because like you, I mean, I haven't been inside the bubble the way you have, but I've been in it enough, and I know enough politicians and how it works, which is what's frustrated me so much. There's got to be a way.
Yeah, and look, I was just going to say about your point about civil disobedience, you're right, it is a sliding scale. I mean, violence, of course, is off limits, and I think that's the thing that's been most refreshing about the protests. They've been, I mean, I've been saying it for a while now, but they are the truest demonstrations of unity that I've seen. They are, we hear from the left all the time this sort of concept of diversity and inclusion and all this stuff. But if you want to see that in real terms, go to one of these rallies. People are loving the support they're getting from each other. They are from different, cultural backgrounds and, different religious backgrounds and probably different voting backgrounds, I'd say. It's the very essence of what this country is meant to be, in my mind. So that's a very good version of it. Look, I don't know that I can answer your question about it, but any more to say that I think we have to follow down the the grassroots political action line for a long time. I think we're in that cycle. I don't think it's really started yet. I think people are now starting to get to the point where, in larger and larger numbers every week, they're starting to say, "Hang on, this is not what we want to be. We've put up with this for a while, and we all knew it at the time. We all knew we were, sort of cashing in our, those of us that feel strongly about this, cashing in our, principles sometimes of liberty and freedom because we were told we should." But I think people are now starting to get to the point where they are going to speak up, and I hope that's something that continues to be sort of, people need to speak to their local members of parliament. They need to speak, they need to write. They need to get moving and sort of, get speaking about it. So I think. I mean, I don't know if I can answer it any more clearly than that, but I hope we've got. I would never want to see some of the things we saw in the United States last year. I just think that's, not good.
So do you get a sense that the federal is just hoping that all of these protests go away, or do you sometimes think that they're trying to foment the populace? I only ask that because now here in America we are getting a lot of our corporate media that's talking about civil war. This was not something that we were ever really talking about before, and then all of a sudden it's sort of like everybody got their talking points, and they keep trying to push us into something. There's that underlying sense of it. So what if there are that many people out there and you have a voting system? Politicians are typically self-preservation. They're going to do what their voting bloc wants. What is your sense on their motivations?
Well, I think people. Is you talk about the people that are protesting, or
no? I think we know what the people who are protesting want. We're talking about the people up top in federal and state that are so clearly going against the will of the people.
Well, I think, my concern is, I'm a servant of the Liberal Party, and I'm always, of the view that the country is better governed by, the Liberal Party. I think, as a conservative centre-right party, that's the case. What I don't want to see is us hemorrhaging votes here, there, and everywhere on the basis of this issue, which is one of the reasons why I've sort of, brought it to the attention. I don't know. I just don't know. I think, as I said, I don't know that the political bubble gets pierced that easily. I hope it does, but I don't know where it goes. Once again, the difficulty is the balancing act between respecting the Federation and taking charge, and I think that's a delicate balancing act. But look, the answer to your question about what the motivation is, I don't know. I think people in higher places have been, busily getting on with trying to manage an economy that's still largely locked down by the states, which provides challenges of its own, by the way. People don't realise that the few powers that the Commonwealth government has. We fund things, and we look at border control and we look at defence. But those are tools I think that can be used. One of the things that strikes me that should be done. We at the moment hold the data about vaccination. So we have in this country, we have an immunisation register, which was originally designed to make sure that your GP knew whether you had measles, mumps, and rubella, but has now become, utilised or weaponised, if you like, such that people can get access to, and businesses are demanding and employers are demanding to see your vaccination status for COVID-19 before you get in somewhere, before you keep your job. Now, that's just not right. That's just absolutely not right. And that is something that we control. That's something that we should be saying, in my view, we should be saying to the states, if you're not going to play ball, then we're going to pull the plug on that and see how you go. So, it's that kind of balancing act. There's no magic bullet, but there's things that we should be doing.
So this is what I was saying. This is what I was more hinting at before. With the whole papers, please thing, if people just refused, there's no way that the businesses are going to not let people in. So I feel like that is the way to do it. That if we all universally stop doing it, that it'll just crumble. Because the authority comes from our compliance, and if we're not complying, there's no authority to do it, right? So this is sort of where I get at civil disobedience, not to harp on a dead point, but this is sort of where I'm coming from. That this is how we do it. That the businesses that ask for your medical history say no, and cite the Medical Privacy Act. I think it was 1988, right? So this is a way that we can do it without having to resort to violence.
Oh yeah. Well, look, I mean, one thing I will say just on that topic, because you raise a very good point about the the kind of onerous nature of what's been thrown onto small business as well. I mean, one of the things that's really struck me over the last 2 years is how much of this small business has taken. People that work in government departments have had a difficult, but like everyone else, but a much easier ride from a financial point of view because they continue to get paid. People who run small businesses are faced with exactly those dilemmas. They have become, certainly in South Australia, they've become the vanguard of checking QR codes, contact tracing, keeping those records, watching people's mask wearing, now checking their passports as they come in, and all the things that go along with it, getting shut down if someone walks into your shop with, a case of COVID. So I just, the last thing I want to see is small business take more of a hit. Because I think really what we're seeing is damaging small business for perhaps forever, and that's really bad.
I mean, the Melbourne CBD is a ghost town, like that's a perfect example. I think I saw a statistic. Don't quote me here, but I saw that the aid in Victoria only got to 14% of small businesses. Right, and I saw a lot of people complaining. Specifically in the fitness industry about, the gyms are being closed longer than anywhere else. Sign a petition instead of just opening their doors, right? So why do you think people have put up with it for so long? Like why are people sitting by?
That's an interesting psychological question that I probably can't answer. I think Aussies try and do the right thing, in their own minds. I think you've seen that businesses are trying to do the right thing. I think Australians are trying to do the right thing. And as you say, how long that lasts before they, just are sick of it, I think we're getting very close to that. I think we're getting very, very close to it. And I think, people are getting tired of all those things. And I think some of the business owners, we hear them on radio here almost every morning, particularly the hospitality businesses who I think have done it as hard as anyone because, the distancing requirements. And there's been this ludicrous situation here in my state where you can go to a bar, but in fact, there's a karaoke bar in town that's been allowed to open, but no one can sing there because somehow that's going to spread COVID everywhere. And that was actually the point of the Freedom of Information application that I was seeking was, well, where's the science? You told us to trust the science. Everywhere we go, we're told to trust the science. That's why we're, running around trying to be net zero by 2020 for some reason, because of the science. Well, where is the science? And show us the science. And of course, that is drawing blanks at the moment. So
the science is getting grilled by Rand Paul over here in America. We're trying to get rid of him.
The science.
The science is everywhere, except when it doesn't suit the political narrative.
But there's science, and then there are we're probably delving into a different area because there is a world full of scientists who are being censored as well. But we probably should not go down that road, I guess, because we're trying to stay on focus for what, the reason we're here for what happened with you. I have another question as well. Just when you ultimately decided to take that stand and join Gerrie in that pushback, had you been getting a lot of feedback from around the state that helped you take that stand?
Yeah.
And did it have a big influence on the decision you took?
A lot. Yeah. And I don't know whether I've become a magnet for it. It's easy to interpret small groups as larger voices, but I can tell you this much: we did some polling prior to going back to Canberra. And the polling revealed pretty comfortably that almost 30% of South Australians felt coerced, felt forced to take the COVID jab. And I've seen polling subsequently which showed it as high as 40, which sort of reinforced in my mind. And of course, some elements of the media here have been saying, well, you're not speaking for the majority, isn't that your job? Well, no, your job is to speak for the constituency and for the state. And the reality here is that there is a significant number of people in this state who are very worried about a breadth of issues. It's not just, it's easy to sort of wrap these up as, issues about a COVID vaccination. That's really only the tip of the iceberg. What we're seeing is a sort of a much bigger issue of government bureaucracy overreach. And it's exactly what's happened. Having been given the tools under the Emergency Management Act to become the authors of everything that goes on, the bureaucracy has taken it and run with it. And there are now literally hundreds of public health directions on top of public health directions, which is exactly what bureaucracies do, just create rules, which are, my background's in the law, and I find it very difficult to navigate in order to get an answer as to what we actually do and can and shouldn't do. But for a person that's never studied, that profession, then it's become unworkable. And the businesses too. The businesses are given enormous maps in order to work with. So there has been enormous concern, and it certainly was foremost in my mind. And it's not something you just take because it's your own personal hobby horse. That's not my job. That's not it. It is a growing and significant concern in this state, as it is around the country, I think.
That's interesting figures, 30 to 40% in just your state alone felt coerced. It'd be safe to say that would be reflective of everywhere. That's likely.
I think so. I think probably there are some states where it's a bit more, a bit less, but I think largely, and if we draw that across, what are we, probably 20 million Australians, if you take out those that aren't eligible, how's my maths going? We're looking at sort of millions, maybe 6 or 7 maybe that have felt uneasy about it. Now, that's whatever people's reasons for feeling uneasy about it, that is the very definition of freedom of individual thought and choice. We shouldn't be making people take something they don't want to, particularly in circumstances, when there are, increasingly other ways of dealing with it.
Okay, so on that, other ways of dealing with it. So we've seen in the US that people are using like monoclonal antibodies and stuff like that they're alternate treatments that I actually saw that were approved for Australia, but they don't tell you about it. Why do you think that is?
Just got a bit of echo there. Could you just say that last bit again?
So it's approved for Australia, I found, these monoclonal antibodies. So why have we not been told about it? Why are they putting that on the down low as opposed to saying, well, this is an option as well?
Yeah, well, look, the TGA do know about it. They are out there. I asked a whole lot of questions about monoclonal antibodies during our last set of estimates round. And look, the answers were effectively that it's a growing technology area, of course, as were the vaccines a year ago. But the foremost, this is my interpretation, the foremost push is to vaccinate everyone. And that's always been the case. And it's interesting that we've done it that way because, of course, we've been through HIV, which was treated in a very different way. Now, you might say, well, that's because the technology wasn't there and, whatever, that may be the case. I just don't know the medical science behind that. But, it's an unusual position to be in when nothing else is being considered. And I don't make that as some sort of push into the world of hydroxychloroquine and ivermectin. It's a whole different can of worms. But certainly monoclonal antibodies are being proven. And I think, as you say, have been approved here. And, we hope we see those sorts of treatments, of course.
Yeah. So I have another question relating to the vaccine. So we've seen people say that the vaccine is to protect other people, but so far I can't find a single vaccine that has ever been given to someone to protect someone else. Where does this narrative come from, and why is not only governments but the media going with this? What's with this narrative?
That is a great question. Jack. And I'm not going to be able to answer it for you because it's a question I ask myself every single day. It is true. There is, and I've said it to much horror on our mainstream media channels here in South Australia that when asked the question, why are you against mandates? It's all about protecting other people. And I say, well, in truth, my understanding of the literature is, and I've spoken to many people who are much more intelligent than I am and much more learned in this area than I am, who will say, no, there is nothing but observational data that shows that there is a transmission protection. the vaccines do what they do in terms of their own personal protection. But when it comes to spreading, we know now that the vaccines are no help in that regard. So I don't know why that's not around. And in fact, I mean, I saw a decision of one of our pseudo courts, the Fair Work Commission, the other day, in a matter of BHP and some workers who were issuing proceedings about the issue of vaccine mandates, and that very, we talk about misinformation in the world of COVID. Well, that is the single biggest misinformation in the world of COVID, that the vaccines prevent transmission, and it was repeated in that judgment. So it's out there. I don't know why. I don't know why that message is not getting through, but it's a worry.
Yeah. Gerrie, unmute yourself.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah.
On that raises that question about where then does our representative democracy come into this? We elect people, you go off there to represent our views, to talk on our behalf. But it's been interesting listening to you explain all of those, everything from this last 45 minutes. A lot of the emphasis has been on the bureaucrats, which it is, the bureaucrats. And I think, well, what's the point? Where does our representative democracy even fit in? If the bureaucrats are running the show, then what's the point of you? Well, it bugs me all the time, Alex, because we feel helpless out here. As a citizen, I feel helpless. We have a small business ourselves. My daughter did when it started last year. Her business got shut down. I mean, fortunately, she's a little bright entrepreneur, but she didn't like it. So that's just one story, but it's an exemplar of so many around this nation, which then begs the question, what is the point of you guys?
Yeah.
If you cannot stand up and say, just combat that, what Jack was just talking about, and you just said it, that we know the vaccines don't do what they told us they do, why can't the Prime Minister just get up there and say, you know what, this is all got to stop?
Well,
I know you probably can't answer that properly.
No, I definitely can. The answer to that is that, and it goes back again to this issue about the states having the control. They have, and the state parliaments have not only gifted those powers, and to be clear, here in South Australia, the Commissioner of Police can effectively come to anyone's door for any reason during this period under the a major emergency period, take that person away, not say why, and not say for how long, and so on and so forth. And we saw a little bit of that with that story in NT and the detention camp. I mean, I don't know the story well, but I saw bits of it. And so the answer to that is because parliaments have just given broad power, and not only that, they've continued to extend them rather than amend them. I mean, at the very least, what should be happening around the states is that these powers should be subject to the directions that are given. So the instrument. The law is passed, and the law then gives the bureaucracy the power to write instruments and update them. And here are some new rules, and this is what changes all the time. But they should be going through a parliamentary panel at least. These are decisions that should be going through elected representatives, even if it were just for oversight, and they're not. So in my mind, the only answer to that is it's because of the ridiculously wide powers that our state parliaments have gifted, and that's what's causing some people. Concern. It's certainly causing me concern, and that is a matter for parliamentarians, and that's why it's so important they get the message.
Well, I had another question because we haven't really, we've heard a bunch about Western Australia, a bunch about Northern Territory, Queensland, Victoria, and New South Wales, but Tasmania and South Australia have been very quiet federally, like countrywide news sort of side of things.
Yeah.
How do you think South Australia has avoided so much coverage, considering the whole the face tracking app, the check-in app? We've got the no singing thing. I think they had no dancing as well. I think was the other one.
Dancing. Yep.
Yeah, yep. But that's all that we've heard. What else has been happening in South Australia?
Well, I mean, we actually haven't had many cases. That's the first thing. So there hasn't been a lot to happen. We've had a couple of instances where one case has shut the state down. You probably remember that, the pizza box case, as it was called. and that never really sort of, quite made a lot of sense. But in any event, we had that. We haven't had much COVID. It's as simple as that. We haven't. But the price for that has been shutting down, compliance, cost. There's all sorts of angles to that. I think, these are a sliding scale, right? So some of the frustration people have had in WA because of the closed border, that is the story. There's sort of always, and WA has always been kind of, a bit more remote, and therefore their closed border is the story. Victoria has been the incredible overreach of government there, which is just beyond comprehension. So other stories have come and gone, but we've sort of, we've come through it all reasonably well. We just haven't had the big name stories or the big outbreaks, which is good. So yeah, I think that probably, and the same with Tasmania, I suppose. They've got the added advantage of being an island as well. So.
So one question I did have on that is with the Face app, about the police tracking you with the face, and you have to send your photo in within 15 minutes if you're in quarantine. What was the reaction from South Australians about that? Because we've heard what the media thinks and what the government thinks, but what do the actual people think about that policy?
I haven't heard much pushback. To be honest, I don't. That's not really something. It's only a relatively new program, but when I heard about it, it just immediately caused alarm bells for me. I mean, it sounds incredibly dangerous and incredibly draconian. Having said that, right at the moment, I'd be rather using it than being in here, and that's kind of the incentive. So, it's sort of funny how it works. Anyway, it's a different argument, different story. But what it does do is, you're right. It takes your GPS position from your phone, facial recognition software. You get a call to make sure you're at home where you should be, and if you're not, the police go looking for you. Now, I mean, at the risk of sounding inconsistent, the fact that I want to be on that, but I'm not, if that doesn't bother people, that kind of system, I think, the argument needs to be whether or not, particularly in circumstances where everyone was told to go out and get vaccinated, 80% of people are or more in some cases, and we're still not being trusted. I thought we were all in this together. Wouldn't people just stay at home like they were supposed to? Like that, it does, none of it makes sense. It all just kind of echoes of bureaucratic overreach, and there are just too many examples of that coming up.
So I have two final questions for you for myself, and then I'm just going to sit and watch the show. First question: had the government never gotten involved in this at all, how do you think the Australian people would have dealt with the COVID pandemic? And then second of all, for people that are connected to my network, most of them are over here in the States. Is there any good social media platform that they can sort of follow your journey? So, to Americans, this is extremely interesting in sort of a dark way. We're seeing the concentration camps that you guys have over there, and then something like this where you would be shut up in a hotel against your will, where this intrigues us, scares us. Anyway, so for my people, if they wanted to follow your journey and what's going on, just to stay abreast of the situation. So if you could tell me, how does the Australian people handle a COVID pandemic, sans government intervention, and then two, how can we follow you?
Well, the first question is an interesting one. I've never read any concepts about, or any sort of suggestion about what that would have looked like. I presume the contagion would have burnt through, and it would have done what it does. I don't know, and it doesn't sound overly appetizing. It's hard to imagine there being zero government involvement. I mean, ultimately we need hospitals and we need some sort of intervention. But so I think it's not so much zero, it's more a question of how much we've had, and we've had too much in my mind, certainly from bureaucracies that are just continuing to intervene in people's lives in the most unreasonable way. So I don't know what that would have looked like, but it would have been completely different. And of course, there are always pros and cons. People would say there would have been more deaths. That's probably true. So that's not good. But there is a downside to what's happening that's not just related to the infection. I mean, we're seeing people now, quite understandably, in rooms like this that are struggling mentally. We've seen the cost of people's businesses struggling, costing them mentally, just the general cost. I mean, each state has spent hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars. The federal government has spent I just forget what the current number is, but it's hundreds of billions of dollars. It's as high as 4 or something like that, I think now, even more, I think. And so that would have all been washed out as well. But it's look, I think it's somewhere in between was probably the right answer particularly for the states. And that's where we'll end up. But I in terms of how they can follow, look, my main platform really at this stage is still Facebook. Senator Alex Antic actually is my Facebook page, and hopefully it's not too, it's not too, out there at the moment. I don't think it is. I'm just sort of telling stories about being in many hotels and that sort of thing, and we'll see where it all heads. But yeah, I haven't quite drifted off into other platforms. I don't use Twitter.
Okay.
I just, I sort of scan Twitter for news.
Choice.
I just don't. Yeah, I just don't. I do not see the point.
I looked for you on there, and I didn't see anything that came up.
No,
and said,
it doesn't exist. Doesn't exist.
That's
I'd get
all
myself
right.
in trouble, and it would become too dark. But I think it'll be interesting to see what platforms develop, because big tech and the control they've got, and that is a story for another day. That is a very, very important issue.
It's all about Minds and Rumble.
That's right.
That's where they should go.
Yeah.
But that's beside the point. Stuart, you got any questions?
I guess the one question I did have is, what do you think will come of the decision by you and by Gerard Rennick to not vote with the government on COVID measures? Like, do you think that'll have any impact on what policies that we see come from the federal government, or what do you think that'll end up having as an effect of it?
Well, I hope something comes of it. The intention was to get some protection for people from these, these sort of overreach areas and from the discrimination points mainly. I mean, that was the thing. We both crossed the floor and voted with One Nation on their discrimination bill, which was the best thing we had available, and we did that along with about 3 others from our own side. So that was something. I don't know where it goes. I think sometimes you just take a stand on principle. That's what we've done, and I hope, and I see. Look, I really do see it as a big opportunity. I think people, it's morally we need to, be involved, but also, I think it's a real opportunity to show, people that we're not going to lose votes to minor parties. I think we need to do that. So hopefully, there's some things brewing in the short to medium time.
Actually, on that last.
There you go. You go, Gerrie.
I was just going to pick up on the losing to minor parties and the reality of that. And are you personally concerned about the growth of UAP and the rise of the Liberal Democrats and the loose coalition, really, that they've formed?
Well, I'm always concerned with the Liberal Party losing votes. I'm a long-term servant of the party, and I always want to see it do well. So yeah, anytime we're not attracting that vote, I'm concerned. But I don't think it's lost. I think that there's a lot of reasons why people, should and would consider, voting for the coalition this time round. I think we've got to shore this issue up, though. I think that's really, really important. Because I know it's a major driver for some of these these concerns that are out there. So I think I think it's a real opportunity to sort of right the ship.
Okay. Sure.
What impact do you think that COVID will have on the election? I think it's March or April next year. Do you think it will still be a major issue when that rolls around, or do you think it'll have subsided by then?
Look, it's hard to know. It's unlikely to see COVID having subsided in any great form by then. And I don't know when the election's going to be, but look, I don't know. I think we're going to see COVID politics going on for a lot longer now. What I would like to see is for those powers that were gifted to be removed as quickly as possible and in as fullness as possible and through the fullness of time. I used to call it a liberty audit, almost everything that was given to be taken back. And history shows that's pretty unlikely, but that should be the goal, in my view, to get back to where we were before. So, but I don't see that happening before March of next year. I think we're going to have to wait a bit longer for that. I think there's more to play out.
With Victoria passing their pandemic legislation to replace the emergency powers, Do you think that other states are going to follow suit, and then we're going to see the entire country covered with these ridiculous government overreach bills?
I hope not. I would very, very, very much hope not. That's some really alarming stuff in there, and we don't want to see the legislative instruments going that way, and we certainly don't want to see the upheaval. That's for sure.
And I think it really goes full circle back to the Bill of Rights discussion as well, though, because we spoke before about the Bill of Rights and how they might or might not work. But even though Victoria has that human rights charter, the fact that they're able to pass this legislation anyway does show that, those Bill of Rights aren't really that effective in Australia, I guess, if we're seeing we've got, two states and the ACT that have Bill of Rights, and so far they haven't done much to really curb the government and the bureaucratic overreach that we've seen during COVID. Like, I haven't really seen have much of an impact from those bills.
Yeah, that's right. Well, it depends on how they're set up, I suppose. And I'm not suggesting that I'm a great fan of a Bill of Rights. I'm just saying that there will be conversations that come out of this that we weren't expecting, I suppose, and this is probably one of them.
Very interesting.
Just make sure that they understand your rights do not derive from the government. Press that in.
Yeah,
very true.
I mean, that's how it should be.
Can I, Alex, just on that, it's a bit off topic, but do you, what are your thoughts on having a recall? If we were to go down this and address some of the things on the Constitution, Bill of Rights, whatever, about being able to recall politicians like they have in the US. What are your thoughts on that?
I haven't given much thought enough. I'm sure there's a whole lot of things that flow from that, but I just haven't considered. It's an interesting concept. I mean, once again, the true conservative in me thinks, I'd be more inclined to not muck around with the system as much as possible, which would be my first thought. But I think this is what you get out of times like this. There will be in future time to sort of pause and have a look at how we govern, and whether it can be improved, and because conservative politics is not about never moving. It's just about doing it with proper consideration, not just because you saw it on a TED talk. So I think there's room for a whole wide-ranging lot of discussions, as you would expect after an event like we've seen the last 2 years.
Yeah, but see, politics has become far too identity-based. I mean, it's out of control. I mean, they argued that in the ancient Roman Republic, they said they were even talking about it then. But, I mean, this is a whole new thing. Parties are, it's just so much, it's pure, unadulterated politics, which is what the states are doing against the federal government, of course. Most of them are Labor, except your state, of course, which is Liberal.
New South Wales.
So that's just something, I mean, how do you address those powers without actually getting into the Constitution? They're not going to give them back. They love them too much.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think they're all points of discussion. I don't know the answer to that, but I think there are things that we need to talk about after this is all done.
Yeah, it's definitely getting a bit tribal, which is I think it's importing from America, which is what I find that a lot of the Australian, I guess, zeitgeist, if you want to call it that, is being imported from America. We don't have much of a uniting identity so much anymore, I don't think. And most of our political thought is coming from the US, I think, anyway.
Well,
at the ground level, anyway. At the ground level, yeah.
Yeah, we do unfortunately seem to be going down that same divisive, state-focused perspective that they have. Like, there's not really any much focus on what Scott Morrison and the federal government can do. It's all talking about the states these days. I guess the discourse has really changed from even just 5 years ago. It's really shifted from the federal government to the state government, and we're seeing that with basically every issue. People turn to the state government to pass laws instead. Why do you think that is? That there's been this focus on the state government as opposed to the federal government?
I think the powers that there are a a lot of powers that rest with the states. I think that's just the fact. We've, the health system, the policing systems, the schooling systems, large chunks of it. So there's a lot of power at state level, and people have got to remember that. And I think this is just, COVID has shown that, perhaps where we haven't seen it for a long period of time.
Yeah, I think that's a very good point. It is really a very, very divisive issue today. As you said, you had, what was it, 30-40% of people, you said that in your state, were opposed to the measures? So I guess it will be
somewhere in between there. I think it's somewhere in between there. I think, and we don't to know the final figure. We don't know. I mean, I think.
I think we might have lost him.
I think it's too big a number as everyone's back.
So anyway, I think you have to go now, Alex, don't you?
I should push off, but it's been great talking with everyone. Thank you.
We have hit the 1 hour
so
mark.
much for the chance. Yeah,
where can people find you?
Really
Is it just Facebook?
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Senator Alex Antic on Facebook, and that's my best port of call at the moment.
Well,
thanks for giving us the time for this podcast.
Yeah, thanks again, Alex.
My pleasure.
It was
thanks for having me, and thanks for everyone for making the time.
Cheers from Texas.
Thank you.
Yeah.